I simulated Trump's policies in Democracy 4, a government simulation game, and this is what happened. Over the last weeks, I have read hundreds of articles about Trump's promises in the campaign and his policies during his 4 years in government. I took notes and I matched his positions with policies available in Democracy 4. Trump supports record funding for the police. I go to the simulation and massively increase funding for the police. Trump wants to reduce the corporate tax. I reduce the corporate tax. Trump likes nuclear energy. I allow widespread expansion of nuclear energy. Overall, I mapped 100 policies that Trump supports in 7 different areas and I fitted it into the simulation. So are you ready? Let's see what happened. In terms of education, a few interesting things happened. First of all, we had a huge problem with a skills shortage. This is due to the combination of 2 factors. First of all, technological development went up, and second, the level of education remained rather low. So first, let's have a look at technological development under Trump's presidency. In line with Trump's policies and promises, I kept a reasonable level of funding for technology colleges and technology grants. This is something that we can say that he supported during his presidency, and I think he would keep supporting that. He actually kept a high level of support for intellectual property rights, of course, extremely high military spending. So I kept all that in place, and that led to a high technology development. But the problem is that if there's technological development, but education remains stable or even goes down, then you will not have enough workers with the knowledge and skills needed for the labor market because they do not catch up with that technological development. So as we can see here, the level of education remained quite stable and low. We did not offer any kind of university grants, and there was no skilled immigration that could fill the skills gap. So that led to a massive problem of skills shortage, which in turn created more problems for the economy. In terms of practical policies, I introduced some cuts in funding to state schools because under his presidency, Trump proposed cuts of 13.5% to state schools. And he has been quite critical of public schools lately, accusing them of being woke. So in line with his past actions and his rhetoric, I reduced funding for state schools. And instead, what we did was to offer funding for religious schools. As we can see here, I didn't provide a lot of funding because I think that wouldn't be the case anyway. And also we had a huge deficit crisis already. So we gave some funding for religious schools. And we also supported overall private schools by offering school pushers and school tax credits. These are basically measures to provide additional funding to families to send their kids to private schools. So for instance, school tax credits is a system of tax reductions and credits designed to encourage people to spend their money on private education in order to reduce their tax liability. And school pushers is something similar. Is a measure designed to encourage the growth of private schooling while still enabling everyone to afford an education. School vouchers are issued by the state to parents for each child, which they can then spend in the private sector on education. So basically it's kind of a gift card that you can use for your kids to go to private schools. So I introduced these 2 policies because Trump has been a big supporter of what he calls school choice. This is basically the idea that families should be able to choose whether they send their kids to public or private schools. And in practice, that means that the state might provide funding to religious schools, and it might provide tax credits and school vouchers to families to send their kids to private schools if they want so. In terms of education, by the way, I also made sure that there were optional prayers in school, since this has been a big topic for Trump. It doesn't really have an impact on education, but of course that makes the religious membership go up and it makes religious people happy. Now, something weird happened. Even though I introduced all these measures to support school choice, as Trump calls it, private schooling did not go up, which to be honest, I feel like it's a bit unrealistic. I mean, if you reduce funding for public schools and provide subsidies for religious and private schools, I think in real life, private schools would become more important, more families would send their kids to private schools. But in any case, that didn't happen in the simulation. I mean, it's true that I did not provide a lot of funding for this because we had a huge deficit already. Finally, in terms of education, I increased funding for adult education subsidies. These subsidies are a way to encourage people to retrain and continue their education after they have joined the workforce. So it's basically vocational training. I didn't know this, but Trump is actually a big fan of vocational training, or at least he says so. So I think it was a reasonable assumption to increase funding for adult education subsidies, given the problems that we had with the skills shortage and functional illiteracy. And it did help a lot, actually. Here we can see how it helped mitigate different problems that we had, and it also improved education, productivity, culture, local communities. But still, vocational training by itself could not totally solve the problems. So overall, the level of education remained quite stable. Some policies helped, like subsidies for adult education centers or vocational training, but some other policies, like the lack of university grants or the reduction of funding for public schools, certainly didn't help. We ended up with a skills shortage, which is not only related to education, but also to the lack of immigration with skills, but also to the fact that there was no skilled immigration and to the fact that technological development went up, so it was not possible to catch up. In short, there were not enough workers with the knowledge and skills needed for that level of technological development. So we're getting closer to the end. Now let's have a look at health, welfare, and other public services. So in line with Trump's policies, I did not make any cuts in state health service in public healthcare because he has promised not to do any cuts in this. Yet I did introduce some policies for people to use private healthcare. So that's why private healthcare, especially by then, went up by quite a lot. And these policies are health tax credits and healthcare vouchers. These policies are very similar to the equivalent that we saw for education. So healthcare vouchers are basically like a gift card that you can use for private healthcare, a measure designed to encourage the growth of the private healthcare while still enabling everyone to access it. And health tax credits are a system of tax reductions and credits designed to encourage people to spend their money on private healthcare in order to reduce their tax liability. So we introduced those policies and we left public healthcare with the same level of funding, but we left these policies as a way to incentivize people to use private healthcare because I think that's aligned with Trump's ideology and Trump's priorities. Overall, the quality of health of Americans remained extremely low. For context, the simulation started around here, so it was already very bad and it just remained extremely bad. And the reason is that while we didn't make any cuts in funding for public healthcare and while private healthcare went up, there are a lot of social and environmental factors that make the health of people to be very bad. And some of these causes are a very long working week, which in turn is related to the cuts in labor rights and work safety laws that we made in line with Trump's actions. There was a high level of pollution, which of course makes health to be bad. There was a contagious disease according to the simulation. There were problems with drug addiction, obesity, alcohol abuse, a food crisis due to very high prices for food. And so all these issues of course make health go down. The bad state of Americans' health also had to do with the cuts that we introduced in different welfare policies. So in line with Trump's history, we introduced cuts into food stamps. We massively reduced the funding for this, even though we didn't totally cancel it. And we also introduced cuts for free school meals, even though in this case we didn't reduce it by that much. Because as president, he proposed to cut the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, with the idea that he wanted to reduce dependency on government assistance. So I introduced cuts to food stamps and free school meals, but that's a problem because these policies do have a big impact in terms of reducing poverty and the food crisis. Other social and welfare policies also had an impact in this regard, such as the low level of work safety laws, something that I spoke about before, or the low level of social care spending. There was a drug treatment scheme which helped a bit to improve health and decrease drug addiction, but still drug addiction slowly improved also because of the different law and order policies that we implemented, but the problem was not solved. In terms of other welfare policies, such as the disability benefit, the state pensions or spending in social care. I didn't make any changes because Trump has promised not to cut social security benefits, so that remained low but stable. I also left untouched some level of funding for family planning. I did this because Trump does support family planning to some degree. He supports IVF, for instance, in vitro fertilization, something that religious people don't really like, but Trump has supported in his campaign. And finally, I did provide a high amount of funding for child benefits. This is because during his presidency, Trump increased child benefits from $1,000 to $2,000. And recently, Vance pitched the idea of boosting child benefits to $5,000. So I reflected that by providing a high amount of funding for child benefits. Child benefits are a fixed payment made by the state directly to parents to assist in the cost of bringing up children. As you can see, it's quite a popular policy, especially among parents for obvious reasons, but the problem is that it's very, very costly.